Welcome to our session on strategies for compliance in employment laws. I'll now turn things over to our presenter.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I wanted to thank you for joining my session. First, I wanted to acknowledge that I realized that we may all have different backgrounds and levels of experience. And I wanted to share that I started the DBA program in 2012. And during that time, I had a lot of difficulty with finishing the program as planned. And I needed to take a break, which lasted for a few years, but then I jumped right back into it in 2020. So between working full-time in my career and being a mother of 4 beautiful boys, it seemed impossible, but I'm so grateful that I stayed the course because it is worth it. And so this program allowed me to challenge myself, and I'm grateful to God, my family, my chair, and everyone that had a hand in getting me to this point today, where I can say that I am an academic doctor, and now I have my work published in an international scholarly journal. So I'm excited to share my research with you today. So let's get to it. So right here we have listed as the title, Strategies for Compliance in Employment Laws, which is a shorter version of the full title, which is Exploring Business Strategies for Assuring Compliance in Employment Laws. Next slide, please. So as background, there are many factors of the macro environment that may have an impact on an organization. The research focused on political and legal factors that impact an employer's adaptability and profitability. Research indicates that monitoring external factors has an influence on an organization, and that an analysis of the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as you see in the SWOT analysis, is a useful strategy to help businesses organize the process of considering and increasing awareness of those external factors. In terms of monitoring the external environment, failing to comply with existing and new legislation often results in time-consuming resources to take corrective actions, fines, loss of business integrity, and reputation, such as recent employment law related to ban the box legislation, which is one of my focuses, which refers to eliminating the criminal history box or field on an employment application. So ban the box legislation is a place to encourage employers to place qualifications at the forefront when considering an applicant for employment. So overall, HR managers must ensure compliance with new and existing employment laws to mitigate adverse organizational impacts resulting from legal fines, negligent hiring, and loss of profit, which leads us to the study that I conducted, which is to identify effective strategies to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws to avoid compensatory and punitive damages. So here we have the problem statement. Now, what I don't have listed here is the hook. The hook is non-compliance with employment and labor laws can result in compensatory and punitive damages of up to $300,000 per instance, which I was able to get from the US EEOC. Then the anchor is the cost of non-compliance with EEOC laws resulted in businesses paying fines totaling $505 million just in fiscal year 2018. So the general business problem is that a lack of preparedness to comply with new employment laws, such as changes resulting in inclusive hiring practices mandated by ban the box legislation, often leads to losses in organizational performance. And then the specific problem is that some HR personnel lack strategies to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws to avoid compensatory and punitive damages. Then the purpose statement. So the purpose of this qualitative multiple case study is to explore strategies some HR personnel use to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws to avoid those compensatory and punitive damages. As such, the study included semi-structured interviews of those who will be knowledgeable of those changes, which are HR personnel. The business impact is the potential to formulate a strategy that is both equitable and ensures non-biased practices in the employment process. To develop effective strategies to monitor the macro environment is an important part of acquiring and applying knowledge gained on external factors that may have an impact on an organization. And then I just love the social impact because it's meant to increase employment amongst marginalized members of society, including persons with criminal histories, which may thereby reduce crime rates, reduce recidivism, and reduce the reliance on government assistance programs. As with ban-the-box legislation, developing inclusive hiring practices to include those with criminal backgrounds can benefit the community as such. Now, tying this back to two concepts identified in literature to ground and complement this study, I took a look at, number one, the top-down model of adaptation to evaluate the integration of ideas throughout the various levels of management. And then number two, the political risk management to identify and analyze the legal environment to mitigate and manage those risks. Both can be used to explore effective strategies used to assess risks in the external environment and to develop strategies to address any applicable changes to an organization. Next slide, please. So starting with the top-down model of adaptation, this framework includes all levels of management, making informed and adaptive decisions and fluid communication. By including all levels of management, the organization allows autonomy amongst members of management, which leads to higher performance outcomes and creates adaptive behaviors for the organization. This is key to an organization adapting to changes in the external environment. Making informed and adaptive decisions also involves autonomy, gain insight, and fluid communication to prevent organizations from excluding key information when developing effective strategies. Fluid communication involves soliciting employee feedback and advice from industry colleagues, and communicating changes throughout the organization. Communication is an effective way to enforce new strategies to ensure compliance from all levels of the organization. Then you have political risk management, which is a concept used to codify the impact of regulations and manage the resulting complexities, which allows an organization to refocus efforts on creating a stable environment and to reduce the inability to maintain discord. Political risk management includes the risk assessment an organization may observe in terms of ensuring compliance when external legal factors thereby impacting an organization's ability to understand the implications. Also to understand the causal chain of events and the probability of the risk actually occurring. Next slide, please. So the research question is, what strategies do HR personnel use to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws to avoid compensatory and punitive damages? So I chose the qualitative research method to explore and gather in-depth insights on strategies beneficial to business operations. Using an exploratory multiple case study design provided substantial data that allows for comprehensive analysis across multiple organizations and how these organizations prepare for and react to change in an environment altered by new legislation. So I interviewed 9 participants across 3 geographical regions, and the data collection methods included semi-structured interviews, member checking, and peer debriefing. I analyzed the data using within-method triangulation for internal validity, which included the first-hand perspective of the researcher in connection with the semi-structured interviews. I also used content analysis by reviewing websites and applicable news sources to analyze how HR personnel monitor the macro environment to proactively enact timely and appropriate strategic intervention. And then as it relates to the software to analyze the data, I use atlas.di to ensure transparency and to classify themes. And since the semi-structured interviews contain open-ended questions, the responses collected were analyzed to decipher and explore effective strategies used by the participants to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws. In analyzing the data, I use inductive thematic saturation to help identify new themes, which is a method of analysis employed by Atlas. The Atlas program contains tools that allows the researcher to explore raw data derived from in-depth interviews to consider the information in various ways, which is beneficial to this study where the results were unknown. Afterwards, I organized the information by category and identified the themes related to political risk management and reviewed trends associated with top-down model of adaptation. Next slide, please. So the overarching research question was, what strategies do HR personnel use to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws to avoid those compensatory and punitive damages? And based on the analysis of the data, 3 things emerged. The first one is strategies to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws. And then we had strategies to anticipate and react to changes in ban-the-box legislation in particular. And then the last one is obtaining feedback on the reaction to changes in employment laws. So to go back to the first one, we have strategies to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws. So most participants found relevance in a number of strategies, which included ensuring compliance from the beginning. The next one is educating themselves on HR policy and applicable employment laws. The next one is engaging the HR team. Then you have working in an organization where the company culture and views are reflective of good morale and integrity that aligns with the ethical standards already woven into the changes in employment laws. I thought that one was very interesting. And then we have collaborating with legal teams to ensure compliance. Among those, self-education, engaging the HR teams, and collaborating with the legal teams is part of the top-down model of adaptation, as fluid communication is encouraged and the interaction may result in implementing effective strategies as a product of all levels throughout the organization. We can also tie the strategies back to political risk management, which is identified throughout those strategies to refocus efforts on creating a stable environment to eliminate and reduce the inability to maintain discord. Political risk management is found in the data as participants shared that their organizations ensure compliance by collaborating with the legal team. And then the second one, so we have the strategies to ensure compliance with ban-the-box legislation, of which the common strategies included, the first one being organizations were compliant with implementing changes associated with ban-the-box legislation. So they already were compliant. The second one is hiring practices were implemented to focus on job qualifications rather than criminal backgrounds of applicants. The next one is some companies were exempt from complying with ban-the-box legislation, as certain organizations were mandated to run background checks before making an offer, such as like childcare. The next one is some participants use a case-by-case basis by using their own discretion when considering an applicant. So of those strategies, some strategies relate to political risk management in that it involves building a reputation and engaging in an effective risk assessment strategy as these organizations ensure compliance. They also establish effective hiring and background check practices and analyze each situation as a unique learning experience to further ensure compliance as the situation presents itself based on the individual criminal background, history, and available job options. Lastly, we have obtaining feedback, which strategies included conducting internal surveys, conducting one-on-one meetings, conducting management meetings in a group setting, implementing an open door policy as an open forum for feedback, gathering information through onboarding surveys, conducting market surveys to obtain feedback from external parties, conducting exit interviews for employees who leave the organization, obtaining customer reviews, obtaining performance discussions, or conducting performance discussions with employees. Of these strategies, the top-down model of adaptation is very relevant. As an organization, we'll obtain feedback from all levels of management. Of the organizations that were interested, and employee feedback, the organization used methods that were best suited to that industry. And then we have political risk management, which is also involved in obtaining feedback, as some organizations conducted market surveys and engaged in soliciting customer feedback through customer reviews. Both concepts were found throughout the strategies that emerged from interview responses. And as it relates to political risk management, there are applicable concepts throughout the strategies. I found that as organizations assess current business processes and company needs associated with complying with employment laws, using the study findings can be a guide to implement processes and effective risk assessment strategies to avoid common barriers and damages. The data also reflected the most common strategies to gauge and feedback on changes to business practices to monitor the external environment and implement the top-down model of adaptation. Data revealed that fluid communication can be an effective strategy for organizational compliance, which organizations can use to communicate changes throughout the organization. The findings illustrate that this method of feedback solicitation ensures compliance measures are met. The impact of non-compliance is well understood by employees affected by the change, and that the organization is effectively monitoring the external legal environment for additional changes. The findings also show organizational trends and strategies used to anticipate and react to changes in employment laws. The findings help to identify the barriers and damages for non-compliance. What I found interesting is that the organizational trends identified the most and least common circumstances involved in businesses responding to ban-the-box legislation. The findings reveal that most organizations are not impacted by the legislation and employ effective strategies to properly assess applicants as individuals with qualifications instead of focusing on the criminal background. Overall, organizations can use the findings of the study to manage risk associated with the barriers and damages. Data also revealed that the most effective strategies as it relates to obtaining feedback and ensuring compliance, such as organizations using this information to implement effective organizational strategies for obtaining feedback when appropriate and ensuring compliance throughout the organization. So some key recommendations include providing employment law compliance education for training programs, as well as changing the company culture and values. And then you have collaborating with the legal team. Next slide, please. Okay, so the interpretation. So the findings of the study can be used to improve business processes, in particular, inclusive hiring practices to engage employees through fluid communication from bottom to top and to engage in effective political risk management strategies. The limitations, so as far as limitations, I would say that involved in this study, it would be the availability of organizations that are required to comply with employment laws. I did find that there were some companies that were exempt from certain employment laws. However, I was able to get some information from those other participants and as well as the ones who were exempt. That was very useful to the study. Then the recommendations. So I recommend sharing these business strategies with top executives, HR personnel, and legal teams to implement processes effectively. And then back to the social change. So the positive social change of implementing inclusive hiring practices is giving hope and employment to individuals who would otherwise be overlooked and disqualified based on their background. And just to be able to provide more background, more jobs, resources, and hope. The impact to the community could involve a reduction in employment rates and could potentially, potentially the negative effects of crime. The impact to the workplace would be to lessen issues associated with harassment, hostile work environments, as well as pay disparity issues. And then on the next slide, I just have a list of references here that I use for this slide. And then the next slide. So in conclusion, employers can effectively anticipate change that may impact their organization by ensuring their internal processes like a strategy, as a foundation centered on an environment where organizational values include integrity and good morale. Participants within this study found that integrity and good morale were best enforced through accountability, obtaining feedback, and complying with applicable laws. When such elements are in place, it is inevitable that adaptation to evolving external factors, such as employment laws, would become seamless. So at this time, I'm going to open up the floor for any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your research with us today. We do have time for questions, so feel free to post those into the chat and I will share those with our speaker. I do have one question to start us off though. Could you tell us something that you learned through this process that surprised you?
Oh, yes. So during the interviews, it was easy to find, well, it wasn't that easy. It was easier to find interview participants, but it was very hard to get them to schedule something and commit to like a meeting. And so like, even if I would like schedule someone for a certain date, I would have to follow up and try to follow up, but try to be respectful. And some people, they would miss their time. So I have to reschedule. But yeah, it was kind of hard to get people on the schedule, because once I did get a chance to get them to participate in the study, it was, I thought it would be easy from that point, but when it comes to getting people involved with like answering questions about their roles in their organizations, I think sometimes people can be a little bit skeptical. And so I realized that I was running into a lot of like obstacles when it came to getting everybody on the schedule. But I think I was able to knock it out like in 2 months, but it was just longer than I anticipated.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question here in the chat. The comment says, hello, I come from research and our studies depend on the use of large sample groups. In the business world, what is the minimum size of a sample group in order to maximize the power of the study?
That's a very good question. So it really depends on what you are researching. And so what I've found within my research is that HR personnel, and I forgot what the reference was, I have to go back and look at my study, but a good amount of people would be from different geographical regions and with a certain level of experience. And so I was able to verify that certain people had like more than 5 years or 10 years of experience, so that I would be able to get something that was actually comprehensive. And so based on my study in particular, I was able to nail it down to about, I think originally I planned for 8 people, but then I landed at 9 people. So it really depends on what you plan to study, and you will need to go in and do your research and figure out what's a good sample size for that.
Excellent, thank you. And again, please post your comments and questions into the chat. I do have another question for you. Could you name one thing that you wish you had known when you started this process?
One thing I wish I would have known, when I started the program, I thought that it was going to take 2 years. And I was mistaken by that, because I came in with my assumption that it was only going to take 2 years. And that was just my mindset, that I need to hurry up and get it done, hurry up and get it done. And so another thing that I wish I would have known is that you have to be very selective and very strategic with your chair, because your chair is the person who will guide you throughout the entire process, and they can either slow you down, or they can get you to a point where the revisions and everything are easier to make. So my chairperson was amazing. I really appreciate him, because with every revision, he was just like he was so strategic with it. Like, it wasn't like we'll go back and forth on the on different edits. He was very methodical and just always available. So I really appreciate him. He was really good. And I had to go and look at the reviews and everything before I selected him. But he was really good. I really liked my chair. So the two things I wish I would have known is like how long it would take, and then just to be more strategic in choosing my chairperson.
Excellent, thank you. And just one last question before we wrap things up. Is there any advice that you would give to other Walden students who are starting to approach the research and dissertations or doctoral study stage of their program?
So the advice that I would give is to really be in tune with your chair. Your chairperson is going to take you far. Just as like important as the selection of your chairperson, just that communication, the relationship with your chair will take you far. As you step into the research field, also make sure that you're involved in Blackboard and see what others are doing, what works for them. You can use your resources. Like, I think the best way to excel in any field, in any kind of project or anything, is to network and to get to know what's out there, know what everybody else is doing, because that can really take you far. Because if you run into a certain issue, you can probably get that question addressed by someone else who has done a similar thing. I even went a further step by going on Facebook, and there's a group there for Walden students who are conducting research, and I was able to ask questions there. So just use your resources, network with people, ask questions. Don't ever try to go through something by yourself, because that information is already out there. You have people who went through the process, and they're available to address your questions. And so I didn't even know like how that I can go beyond just a ProQuest publication and go to another scholarly journal and get something published that way. And so that's something that I had to ask questions and just get that information out there, do some research, and I was finally able to do it. And it was like this month that I was able to get it published in an international scholarly journal. So that was amazing.
That's really exciting, and that's great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and also your research with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.